So stickler for time, so it's 6 o'clock, and we technically have a quorum of the committee, so I'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. The first order of business is the review and approval of the July 22nd, 2024 meeting of the Housing Planning and Development Committee. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So that's complete. Now we're going to go into kind of why we're here. So there's two items on our docket, one of which is Ordinance 11-2024 and Resolution 2024-42, both dealing with the same information, concepts. One's an ordinance, one's a policy, but have a lot of similarities between them. And you know, this was introduced by myself and two co-sponsors earlier this year, I believe in June. And we've been working with administration, you know, to find the right complete street ordinance for Lakewood. Lakewood's unique. We have unique qualities in Lakewood, but we can also look to our peer communities and best practices to see what might work best for us here in Lakewood. And one thing, when I was drafting the ordinance with my co-sponsors, you know, we focused a lot on Cleveland's ordinance that was passed, I believe, in 2022, to kind of understand the outline of what the ordinance can look like, and then also took a lot of guidance from Smart Growth America. Has kind of a scoreboard and a kind of principle list for what complete streets should look like and how they should be implemented. So through the process of drafting the ordinance and kind of working with the administration, Phil Kidd and Jacob Van Sickle in particular have been really helpful in kind of explaining how Cleveland has rolled out their complete streets ordinance, and also their journey from nothing to a policy to an ordinance. And I know that Phil and Jacob have made themselves available to our administration as well, and there's been some phone calls where we've exchanged ideas. But I thought it was good to open it up to council, so council could also benefit from their knowledge, ask them questions, and also open it up to the community as well. So Phil Kidd is the Complete and Green Streets and Trail Manager for the City of Cleveland. And he has been tasked essentially within the City of Cleveland with implementing or organizing, because implementing is a whole cross-department effort in the City of Cleveland. And then Jacob Van Sickle is the Executive Director of Bike Cleveland, but he's also a member of the Cleveland Transportation Investment Advisory Committee, which is the committee that oversees and provides recommendation and guidance on the city's implementation of complete streets. And I thought it would be appropriate to have Jacob kind of explain his advocacy to get the City of Cleveland to implement a policy. And then when it went from a policy to an ordinance, kind of the advocacy behind that and the difference between the two, and then kind of where he's at now at the city on the Transportation Investment Advisory Committee. And then we'll have Phil kind of go through maybe how the ordinance was drafted and maybe how it's working, and some things that they're seeing that maybe, has changed from the ordinance to now how they're implementing. So I figured, I've been over this a million times with them, but I also seek to learn new stuff, and I'm sure my colleagues will too. So Jacob, would you kind of dig into your advocacy, the resolution, into the ordinance, and kind of where the City of Cleveland is now?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Kyle. Again, my name is Jacob Van Sickle. I'm Executive Director at Bike Cleveland. I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the folks from Bike Lakewood here. Bike Lakewood is a chapter of Bike Cleveland, and these guys and gals, do great work in the community, helping educate people how to bike safe and kind of build a culture around biking in the community. So I was engaged with the City of Cleveland's first policy around complete and green streets back in 2011. It was drafted by a number of people, including some local foundations and advocates who, at the time really wanted to see more infrastructure being built that accommodated people of all ages and abilities and allowed them to easily and freely get around. As part of that policy, there really wasn't any organizing entity. I like to tell people that, complete streets, it's really a framework, an approach, and a process. It's not an end result. It gets you to an end result, but it's really about the process that gets you to a good result in the end. And under that ordinance, it really focused mostly on individuals in traffic engineering and public works to really interpret the ordinance and to put it into practice. And it worked a bit. We ended up creating a complete and green streets typology for the city, where we developed a typology of streets ranging from very small to very large and determined what type of infrastructure could be placed on those. But without any teeth in the ordinance, and when I say teeth, there really was no body to for folks in MOCAP to work with to ideate and come up with different
And
designs.
for folks that aren't familiar with City of Cleveland, what, could you explain? I know what that is.
Yeah, MOCAP's the Mayor's Office of Capital Projects. Sorry, I'll try not to use acronyms. Because there was no process for them, a lot of times what we were seeing was, and it was actually in a total of about 30 miles of streets that were repaved and put down the way that they were. The other issue we ran into a lot was folks in the Mayor's Office of Capital Project were designing projects up to 30 or 60% design and then going to the community and asking for input. But at that point, it was too late to really do any substantial changes to the street to really make it fully a complete street. So back in 2018, we started having conversations, before we did 2018. As a result of that 2011 ordinance, we did get about 102 miles of new bicycle facilities in the city of Cleveland. It was the largest number of mileage that the city has ever installed in a 13-year period, and included a lot of road diets, so it was a really lot of traffic calming as well. In 2018, we started seeing a lot of really important streets get repaved and reconstructed without the thought of any other users besides the cars that were using them. And we started having conversations with Councilman Kerry McCormick in the city about how we can adjust the ordinance. And we engaged folks from Smart Growth America as well as the American Heart Association and pulled pieces together from a series of ordinances that were ranked really high by Smart Growth America and put them into one package for the city of Cleveland. And the key changes with the new ordinance that passed was it established a Transportation Infrastructure Advisory Committee, which Councilman Baker referenced. And this is a committee of appointed city residents, appointed by the mayor and by city council. It includes city departments as well as external partners like RTA and NOACA, as well as the sewer district. And what we do is every quarter we review a capital project that's coming up on the city's radar. We'll oftentimes go out and do a walk audit of the street, identify issues we want to see addressed with the street reconstruction, and we write up a series of recommendations that then the city can turn over to their contractor, and they can also use it as part of their identifying what funding do we really need for this street to make it be a complete street. Versus under the old ordinance, it wouldn't go to anybody outside of the city until the project was 30 to 60% done, so the street largely stayed the way that it was. The new ordinance also required that the city of Cleveland develop a new mobility plan. Our mobility plan was from 2007. As you can imagine, the way we design our streets in 2007 is very different than the way we design our streets today in many respects. And it also required annual reporting. The other piece that it requires is around exceptions. So any recommendation that the TAC proposes that isn't accepted as part of the project, the city will be required to provide a list of the exceptions that they're not going to do and explain why, and that has to be made publicly available. I note that because really, Complete Streets is really about building a partnership with how our streets are designed. It's about transparency, and it's about thinking about other users than just people in cars, but people walking, people biking, people in strollers, and people in wheelchairs. I think that's all I'll say for now. I'll let Phil Kidd take over from here as kind of the city implementation side.
Check, check. Okay. I am Phil Kidd. I am the Complete and Green Street Manager for the City of Cleveland. One of the, I guess you'd say, benefits of the updated ordinance in 22 was also the creation of my position, which was, I think, very important for capital projects because it gave us some added capacity to allow our engineers to have someone to, kind of think about this and work with the TAC committee and also other departments in City Hall. And Jacob really did a good job. I think he covered a lot of the key points. I will just mention that I've been doing this work for about 20 years in various iterations. And before I started with the city, I worked at a community development corporation on the west side. Northwest Neighborhoods was formerly Detroit Shoreway. And I had worked with the office in which I work with now with Capital Projects on the West 65th Street project and also the Lake Avenue project, which I think folks here are probably familiar with the Lake Avenue project in particular. And to Jacob's point, I was on the other side of that table with Bike Cleveland, with our council person, with the CDC and the community, advocating for things that, again, a project that was already, at that point, probably 60% of the cake was baked. And in addition to that, an important thing about that is that the financing for the project was already pretty much locked in at that point. So if there were any additional design elements that we wanted to incorporate or changes or things like that, that became very problematic because it was going to then set timelines back on the construction schedule. And that is particularly problematic when you're dealing with, of course, state, federal funds. And so one of the benefits of this ordinance, as Jacob mentioned, is we are looking at projects now that are probably no less than 2 years out from the beginning of design, let alone construction. And what that allows us to do is to have ample opportunity to begin to kind of think through as a team, not kind of like city, the city shall present this project and then the community shall respond and the committee. We're really trying to workshop projects and kind of come to solutions. And think of it as someone who's like really good at making, like a cook who's really good at making like one thing. When we have more people at the table, we get a better meal at the end of the day. And I think that's what we've seen. We've reviewed our 6th project, about to review our 7th project. And I think we've gotten to a point now where our capital project staff is seeing the value in this, our engineering department, but also I think we're getting unique perspectives from folks from particularly even on the green side of things, street greening, from the sustainability side. There's other things that when you think of a complete street, you think of pedestrian and bike safety and things of that nature, but there's other elements to it. And we are getting ready to we're getting ready to go to construction with one of our first projects that the committee reviewed. And, we think there's going to be a pretty good outcome on these projects because we had ample time to be able to kind of workshop them. We've identified the funding sources. We've been able to, because we've had that time in those conversations, find additional external funding, make changes to some of the project designs. For example, instead of repouring, if we're doing water line replacements on the street, instead of just simply repouring a lot of that sidewalk, instead what we're doing is we're removing that impervious surface and creating tree lawn, but then that's leveraging dollars for $75,000 to $100,000 tree planting grants on the back end that we partner with community organizations or whoever it might be. Just one example of that. But also other trade-offs, like we were working on the Payne Avenue project in downtown, which is like East 13th to East 30th Street. Initially, that was just going to be a repave, a mill and fill, and restoring some street parking, better striping. But we pulled the planning department in with members of the TAC committee. We're now going to implement the first parking protected bike lanes in the city in that project. That was simply a matter of being able to redesign lane striping, but the 1.0 version of that project wasn't going to include that. And now we're going to have that also continue from East 30th all the way to East 55th. So it's just one example of how we're getting better outcomes on these projects without not having to necessarily make dramatic changes, but it's about the framework and the process and having the conversation. So, like with most things like this, I think there was a lot of apprehension from different departments. They didn't want to feel like, there are certain things here when you folks with PEs and things like that, they have credentials on the line and they have to do things in ways that are making sure that things are safe and all of that. But I think that we've all gotten to a point now where everybody's pretty comfortable with this process. And again, we've reviewed 6 going on 7 projects now, and it's going really well. And the other thing that I'll just mention is that it's allowed us to also have more interdepartmental collaboration in between these meetings. So planning department is sitting down with the engineers on a regular basis now and having more conversations about, okay, we got this project coming up, but it's not necessarily a Complete Green Street project. It might be one of these, mid-tier type projects. Are there some things that we can do here that we can introduce to maybe improve that particular design? Because there's a whole host, that's a whole nother tier of types of streets. And that's happening a lot more. And I just think that the framework, the process has allowed for that dialogue to exist where things felt very siloed before. And so I've been there about a year and a half now. And even just in my year and a half, I think that we've all are kind of collaborating in a way that's productive, but it's also allowing us to have conversations about other things with these other projects that aren't necessarily like, on the agenda for a Complete and Green Street committee meeting. And that's been really good because it's trust and it's communication, and it's allowing also the community to have input too, because they're reaching out through this committee to provide input. And so it gives, opportunity to the community to offer input, because at the end of the day, it's an advisory committee. And, the city at the end of the day has the final say. But that advisory committee has been one that has given a lot of voice to a lot of good different designs. So I will stop there, and we can talk about what you want to talk about.
Thank you both. I think that's really helpful. And, like I said, Cleveland is different, it's bigger, a lot more residents, a lot more streets. But I think seeing the ways in which you've been successful and the ways in which you like to refine things to create a better outcome is really helpful. Now, I do want to open it up to any of my colleagues that may have questions for Phil or Jacob about the city's version and the city's process and how it may inform ours. Committee members first, if there's any.
Yeah, thanks to you both. This is a great help for me personally, just being newer to this the council. So it's nice to have an overview about where we've been and then your great work you're doing in the city of Cleveland. I'm a little interested, can you talk more about the public input process, how that works exactly? Is it all kind of funneled through the committee, the advisory committee? Or are you holding specific meetings in neighborhoods for this? If you could just get a little deeper into that.
Yeah, you want me to kick it off? Yeah, so when we identify a project for Complete and Green Street, that's going to go in front of the TAC committee first. And there is some opportunity just because it's a 10-member committee, some of which are, folks like Jacob and others who already have relationships with networks of people who, they are able to kind of gather some initial feedback and have their comments reflected of some of those networks. So we see some initial community input at that stage. But then, of course, like any other major capital project, there is a actual, public meeting process at 2 public meetings during design, then of course another one pre-construction right before we're ready to go to construction. The benefit of being able to get this in front of a TAC committee and get some of this conversation going so well in advance of a meeting is that when we come into that first public meeting for design, we already have a design that is something that is reflective of some of the things that we know that the community is going to be interested in. And I think it allows us to have a more refined conversation about some of the details of that. Or for instance, maybe there's a situation where we're presenting that design based on some initial feedback, but when we go into that public meeting, there might be some business owners in that area or someone who didn't have that opportunity. And they say, hey, look, I'm not necessarily opposed to, let's just say, a separated bike lane in front of my parking, but this is the area where I don't have side street delivery and my 18-wheeler does delivery here. So we have to figure out how to kind of negotiate that. And we've done that in a number of different instances. There's some really big projects we're working on where we really have to work through that nitty-gritty. But then there's other just smaller projects that we think that, I'll give you another example on Wade Park Avenue between East 66th Street and East 118th at East Cleveland border. That was the last project we presented to the TAC committee. And on that street, there is kind of limited, restricted on-street parking. It's time restricted, but there's no RTA route. We don't have anything like that to contend with. So naturally, we are thinking, and as a committee and at City Hall, this is a great place to put in separated protected bike lanes because it would create a low-stress street, a network from University Circle all the way to East 66 and you connect to Euclid in a public square. But we had some members of the community when there was some additional outreach with the CDC in the neighborhood, residents who actually desire a little bit more consideration for parking in certain areas that they've never had before. So instead of just wholesale putting in the design, we can come to the public for that first public meeting with now maybe several different designs where we keep on-street parking on one side of the street and we have on the other side of the street a bidirectional separated parking lane, a couple different scenarios. And so we can have a more productive conversation in the first public meeting. So that all is a result of having the TAC committee be able to provide some initial public input that they're getting from the public and from them as experts, allowing us to put together some refined design options, and then going into the first public meeting where it's just, open to the general public and get some more specific, very localized feedback and maybe make some tweaks at that point. And that is an example of how we get the best outcome possibly on that particular project.
Great, thank you.
I think in addition to all of Phil's points, and just another example, that Wade Park example, once we learn that's going to project we're going to review, I'll usually pull our member database from Bike Cleveland. We're a membership-based organization, so our contacts within a half a mile of that corridor, and email our members and say, hey, we're going to be reviewing this project. Are there concerns or issues or things that you want highlighted within the recommendations? And similar to what Phil said, also reached out to the Community Development Corporation to say, hey, we're doing this project. Are there any things we should kind of flag within our recommendations? And then this isn't in the ordinance. This is just Phil Kidd being an awesome Phil Kidd, but he also publishes a monthly Complete and Green Streets newsletter that goes out to the
Just came out
community.
today.
That just came out today.
Thanks for reading.
And that's a great opportunity, too, for people to be aware of projects that are kind of in the pipeline or projects that are coming up, or even just activities that tie into Complete and Green Streets to keep it on people's minds. So.
Any other questions from the committee? Councilman Bullock.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Jacob, good to see you. Phil, nice to meet you. So a couple questions. The process, it sounds like early is the mantra. And I hear you loud and clear when you're talking about funding cycles getting started even before the design gets started. And all of a sudden, your hands are 80% tied and not free. And so it sounds like the success you're experiencing is not having an engagement with the public with either A or B, or really it's this or nothing, but here's a suite of options that have already engaged with the subject matter, with the known concerns of the residents, so that so that the public engagement is more effective. Do you, our process in the proposed ordinance may be a little different. Do you have a formal approval downstream after those public engagements, or it goes through your planning commission or some other body? That's question number one. Question number two is, budgetarily, are you seeing, are these projects more expensive, less expensive, or about the same? It's just that we're using resources in a different manner. Be curious to hear your characterizations there.
Yeah, sure. So the answer to your first question is yes. Our planning commission does review these projects, particularly Complete and Green Street level projects, which are what we would consider like full rehabilitation projects in most cases. So that is where, oftentimes also we're going to be going into the right of way on the sidewalks as well. There are some of these projects that, because of the aging infrastructure, we use these as the opportunities to leverage resources to be able to fix all the water lines and things like that. And then that triggers the ability to be able to reset those right of ways with maybe putting in the new grass tree lawns or whatever streetscape amenities we want. So because of the dynamic or comprehensive nature of that design, that would go in front of a planning commission, and then they would provide also an additional layer of comment. So oftentimes, though, by the time it gets to the planning commission, it's gone through a very thorough process. The council person in that area, there's been numerous, it will have gone to the TAC, it will have gone through public meetings. The council person will have had a chance to be able to add their comments to the planning commission. So really, when it gets to the planning commission level, there's not traditionally a lot of substantive change, because they're also mindful of the fact that there is a certain there's a budget, for a given project. The second question about, I think it was like more of a financial question. Can you repeat that one? I forgot that one.
Sure. Just in general terms, are these, are Complete Street features incorporated into projects more expensive, less expensive,
Oh, right.
or about the same? It's just that pardon me, we're configuring the resources differently?
Yeah, so, it really kind of depends on what we think is a priority for a particular project, and a lot of that is context specific. So if we know that let's say we're looking at our crash data, and we know that a street is going to be in one of our top 10 zones for, being able to really address a pedestrian safety issue in particular. I'll give you an example, Lee Road, down in the southeast side. That's a road where Shaker Heights they're putting together about a $25 million full rehabilitation from Van Aken all the way to the border of Cleveland. And so in that case, we know that the intersection of Lee and Harvard is one of our top 3 crash areas. And so when we get to the point where we're looking at doing that street, that's not simply something that we want to do a mill and fill and just put down some enhanced crosswalk striping and maybe change the signalization. That's something where we really need to reconfigure the right-of-way in a way that really narrows and necks down that area. And if we're thinking about putting in bike lanes that would have to intersect with that, how we do that in a way that it might be sidewalk level separated, things that might be related to the continuity of another design, for example, like Shaker, because if we did a different design from someone, the user experience coming from Shaker into the city, and they're going then in street, that is something that might present a safety hazard for somebody who is not an experienced cyclist, for example. So in that situation, we decided, you know what, we need to push the project timeline on this project maybe out another year or 2 years. And we need to be able to raise the capital necessary to make those types of improvements. So in that case, that was one where we said, we're not going to just do kind of what we have the budget for to do now. We need to spend some additional funding and do that. I would say in other projects, it's a matter sometimes of trade-offs. So we know what our project budget is. Let's say, for example, Wade Park Avenue, the one that I was referencing between 66th and 118th. There are some pedestrian crossings there that we know that they have signals, and those signals are probably not needed. And we know that it leads to a lot of just people gunning it right off the light, and that's causing issues where there's apartment buildings nearby, there's a school nearby. So maybe the better solution there is removing those signals and putting in roundabouts in those areas. So now that's a little bit more of a project cost, and that might have to mean that some other element of the project, there might have to be some adjustments there. But we feel that that is a pedestrian safety enhancement that's a priority, that's an important thing. But also, given the fact that we have a few years to be able to work on that project, there may be some additional resources that we might be able to take our bond funds and move a little bit more money there and maybe leverage some dollars through ODOT to get more funding for that project for whatever we may be. So I know that's kind of like wonky city hall, stuff, but you guys probably understand what I'm talking about. And so we look at it from a value standpoint largely, I think.
Yeah,
And,
that's very helpful. That's
sure.
an excellent way to talk about a value standpoint. Just one quick parting. It sounds like you have tiers of different projects. Some are full-on complete streets, others are lesser intensity, and so you may have a expedited process for the lesser intensity ones. Is that
yes.
accurate? Okay.
Yeah, and I would say there's just, like the next 3 years, we're going to be doing, and Jacob can talk about this in detail because he's been really at the forefront. We're doing a lot of things, and I think this is applicable to Lakewood, is we're going to be doing a lot of what's called quick build projects, which are quick safety, not capital intensive projects to provide additional safety. These are chicanes and speed tables and bump outs and enhanced crosswalk paintings and things like that. And the Cleveland, we're going, as Jacob mentioned, we're updating our 2007 mobility plan. We haven't done it for 18 years. Part of that will be a 3-year plan for just those types of projects. And those are things that you might consider, lower tier or quicker intervention. It's not something we're waiting for 3 or 4 years from now to make an intervention. We go out there and we do it now. We do it next year with the budget we have.
Well, that's tremendous work. You guys are really on fire, and so I admire what you're doing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'll just add real quick to Phil's point. He mentioned quick build projects, and I think of projects like Payne Avenue, which was designed with a bike lane, but is now being reconfigured with a higher facility, a parking protected bike lane at very minimal cost. So a lot of these things can be done just with paint, planters, posts to really kind of narrow down the street or create a space for somebody on a bike or using a wheelchair. And then the other thing I didn't mention earlier, and Phil reminded me in his comments, was In my eyes, one of the sea changes that happened with this new ordinance, and maybe it's with new staff at City Hall, was, instead of just approaching a project and saying, look, we have poor street condition, let's do these projects. They're starting to look more at the data, specifically the safety data, to see, where are our most dangerous streets and where should we really be prioritizing those funds. And utilizing the data through the TIAC to identify, look, we know that these intersections are difficult, there's a lot of fatal or serious injury crashes. Let's spend some of our more money there so that we can ensure that the street doesn't still become an issue in the future.
Yeah, and that dovetails, Jacob, thank you, nicely with the active transportation plan that we recently incorporated here in Lakewood. I think I've spoken a little bit about it with you guys, but basically has a menu of all the different intersections and interventions and proposed bikeways and boulevards. So it kind of gives us a nice menu of things every time we do a project. Any other questions from Councilperson Strubig?
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Baker, and thank you, Mr. Kidd and Mr. Van Sickle. I have 2 questions for you. The first one is, when you're holding public meetings for neighborhoods, how are you notifying those residents that these meetings are coming up? Are you emailing? Do you have a block captain program, or are you emailing them? Are you putting door hangers out? Do you put yard signs out to announce, or are you going door to door, or how is that communication piece happening there? And then the second piece, the second question is, when you say they look at the safety data, is that internal engineers? Do you have safety specialists on staff, or who are these folks that are looking at intersections that would say, yeah, we should really do a roundabout here, or we should put chicanes in here, or we need who are these people that are doing that? Thank you.
Sure. You're really teeing me up on the first question, because this is my passion, because I come from community development. But to answer your second question, traditionally that's coming from our traffic engineering department. Sometimes that's outsourced. Like if we really need a comprehensive study of a large corridor, then they might outsource that work. But traffic engineering is the holder of that information, the traffic study, and then they also are the ones that ultimately, working with planning, working with multiple departments, making decisions about what type of interventions make sense. But ultimately, traffic engineering signs off on whatever would go in the street and get installed. But to your first question, I personally try to put a premium on a very wide range of outreach, and that is it starts with things as simple as the newsletter that Jacob had mentioned and Cal had mentioned, but we have our council offices in Cleveland are I would say they're pretty great partners in this sense. They really utilize their networks and through their newsletters and their emails to really get the word out to probably areas of wards that through traditional means are hard to reach, because they just have all these relationships that, of course, they've built over time. So that we lean on council people quite a bit. And then we have the luxury of having an organization like Bike Cleveland, who, if we have a notable project, they're leveraging that resource to oftentimes turn people out for those meetings, and definitely localized in the sense of who are from the membership are from those particular areas, maybe like where the project's at in particular. And I'd say, of all the projects and meetings that I've been involved with, public meetings, we've had really good turnout for all of those and very good conversation. But in addition to that, a lot of it sometimes, and I do this myself, is I go door to door, and I'll put flyers out myself. And if it's a particularly sensitive project where we know, for example, like what I was referencing before about business owners who might they're busy, man. They're running a business. They might not know about this roadway project coming up, or they might not know that we're making changes to the sidewalk. We're putting in tree lawns and trees. We go the extra step oftentimes to just take that extra step and door knock and talk to those folks. And it goes a long way, because the last thing what you want is to show up with a contracting crew, getting ready to go to construction, and something's happened in somebody's property, and they have no idea, what's being proposed. That's where you don't want to be. You do that, you've failed. So I would say it's a plethora, but I will also say I am a huge proponent of signs. Signs are one of the most equitable, most efficient ways to get the word out. Creating a simple project website with a QR code. I know a lot of people don't have QR code, but at least some form of contact information about how they can get more information about a project and put it right on that project site area. It's great for housing projects, of course, but roadway projects, it works well. And that really does get a lot of folks contacting me in particular, saying like, had no idea, saw the sign, thank you. I just, most times I just want more information or what the next meeting is.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Council President Keppel.
Thank you. Thanks again for being here. This is very helpful to get this perspective. You mentioned with the mobility plan, is that meaning mobility as in accessibility mobility, or as in active transportation, or safe streets, or what does that mean?
Want to take this one?
Yeah, it's a plan addressing pedestrian, bicycle, and access to public transit movements. There are likely some recommendations in there around ADA and accessibility. I know we work a lot with LEAP, which is Linking Employment's Abilities and Potential, and focus a lot on ADA rights and access. So yeah, it's comprehensive. And as Phil mentioned, in terms of implementation of the plan, it's being framed in a way of a quick 3-year rapid implementation build out, quick, cheap, but safe infrastructure.
Thank you. And does the city of Cleveland have an ADA transition plan? Do you happen to know?
No, we do not, but we are up, it is part of I believe it's part of the Cleveland Moves plan, because on the TIAC committee is Beth Glass from LEAP, so she's very much an active member, and that perspective has been great. In fact, she just presented part of our TIAC meetings, we forgot to mention this, but the way that we structure the agenda, we do a project presentation, and then we discuss the tax comments, which they've been given the information on the project at least 30 days in advance, so they have a month to be able to put their comments together, and then we talk about those comments in the meeting. The second part of the meeting is talking about other project updates. So we're sharing all the updates of all the things happening. So it's mostly informational, but it's to inform the group. But then the third portion is a special topics presentation, and we use that as an opportunity to provide, kind of what's the latest best practices going on. And in fact, Beth from LEAP presented to the TIAC last meeting about that very thing. What are the updates in the ADA codes, and what are some specific challenges in the streets of Cleveland, giving, like actually looking at projects that we recently did and showing how those curb ramps were installed in a way that, like from a design perspective, it seemed to make sense, but from a user perspective, these are the issues that you encounter, and so that we just keep learning, So we use the TIAC committee meeting for those types of opportunities as well.
I think that was actually, that leads into my, so you mentioned on the TIAC includes, you mentioned like RTA and the sewer district and some of those community partners. Are there also, and then Beth, of course, so are there also just citizens, or how big of a group are we talking about, and who else is?
Funny you should ask that. I have it pulled up right here. So, there are a few city staffers. So we have the chief operating officer. We have a city council person. We have a representative from ODOT, a representative from the sewer district, RTA. We have by Cleveland, of course, Jacob. We have Beth Glass from LEAP. And then we have 2 appointees that are residents. One's from the mayor, one's from the council. Andre Daly lives out in Collinwood. And he's the mayor's appointment, and then Jeff Sleesman, who's also RTA board member, is pretty active. But anyway, two citizen representatives as well. And those folks, there is some criteria for their appointments. They have to have, I can't remember from memory exactly how it's spelled out, but they have to have some kind of background or some experience in complete and green street related stuff. It's not like they have to be a landscape architect or an engineer or anything like that. But as long as they have some working knowledge, we want to hear that type of, kind of citizen perspective on the ground.
And then the other one is, you mentioned the Planning Commission does also review projects in addition to the TIAC, and you said particularly complete and green streets. So does that mean, you said there was like a tiered system for which ones are considered for full TIAC review, and if I'm repeating this back correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong. So some projects go through that full review, and then any of them that go through that full TIAC review would also go to Planning Commission, but not all things go to TIAC and not all things go to planning. Is there like a metric, or what kind of metrics are used for that?
Usually if it's what we call a full rehabilitation of the street, meaning like we're actually doing more than just the mill and fill, and we're doing substantial right-of-way work from the entire right-of-way, sidewalk and between the curbs, any kind of design change elements that are significant. So we're talking about projects roughly, this is before inflation numbers, you know, like starting at like, you know, probably north of $5 million at minimum. There are other projects that we can consider mid-level, but we still consider complete and green streets. So those might be streets where mostly the work's going to be mill and fill, but we might be able to do some lane striping configuration changes, and we might be able to do some depaving of the sidewalks and add tree lawns and do some street tree planting. So that we're accomplishing some of the metrics and some of the goals of complete and green street, but they don't rise to a level that it would be considered a complete rehabilitation of the street. So those ones do not go to Planning Commission. Those are kind of handled in-house. But like the Superior Midway project, the big Bike Boulevard project, of course, on Superior, the Lee Road project, which I mentioned before, projects like that are going to go in front of the Planning Commission because those projects are $25 million or more, so they certainly reach that threshold. But that generally speaking, that's the criteria for it.
So those mid-level ones would still go to TIAC or not?
Yeah, they would, yeah.
Okay.
So that's the value of TIAC. It does give some kind of, some form of a body, you know, some look at it beyond it just making decisions in-house within departments. So it's been helpful in that sense.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councilperson Marks?
Thank you. It's more of a comment than, well, I guess there's a question in here. So I just want to acknowledge you, Jacob, because I think I met you first in 2014 and 2015, and like Cleveland was not as big as it is today. You've been a huge influence, and I'm so grateful that, excuse me, that the city of Cleveland is embracing you and your ideas to make a difference on making these green streets possible. And I want to acknowledge Bike Lakewood, who is always here, always has great input to give us on council on how to make our streets more safe for bicyclists. But if I could ask this of you, Jacob, how easy was it for you to integrate with the city of Cleveland so your voice gets heard? Because I think sometimes our wonderful people in Bike Lakewood sometimes don't feel that their voice is heard as loudly as it should be.
Yeah, I would say it took years, and in some respects, it took an administration change. It really takes, you know, a mindset. I feel like some cities know how to work with advocates, and some just get irritated by us. So yeah, I would just note it takes time, and it also takes bringing value to the table. You know, helping turn people out to public meetings, to city public processes. We as an organization have provided match dollars for plans, and I think it's really about, you know, trying to find any way you can to be a partner with the city, and I think that's what we've tried to do, although we do butt heads occasionally, but I think that's part of our role in society. Yeah.
Thank you for all you do, both of you. It's wonderful work that you're doing. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And you're, you know, you were touching on lots of topics that, you know, we're thinking about as we're thinking about how to put together our process, right? What is a transportation project that goes through complete and green streets? What isn't? What's the exemption process? Can you, so I think you touched a little bit on the exemption process, but it sounds like the way, if I heard correctly, it's that the TIAC comes up with proposed interventions or proposed project scope items or something like that. And then that's the exemption process. Either the administration accepts what the TIAC has proposed or they don't and they have to explain it in writing. Is that generally how it goes?
Yes, that's right. We record all of the comments from the TIAC, and then, you know, we think of it like a matrix, you know, that we break those out. Now, we haven't gotten to a point where we've done a project yet where, you know, we posted those comments and responded to them because the process is so new. We will probably have our first project like that next year. But those comments go to the contractor well in advance, and we have an idea of what's going to be possible and not. And we're certainly not trying to pull any surprises, you know, come back to the TIAC and say, like, you know, in the last minute we couldn't do it. if there are things that, if there are design elements that we're not able to do, we're having that conversation with the committee well in advance, you know, to let them know. Because there might be other ways that we can work out an alternative to that issue. But the point of it is that we're having the conversation, you know, in advance. So that has been hugely important, I think, if nothing else, throughout this whole process. So we will, on the website, our new website at City Hall, folks will be able to click a project. They will be able to see the project fact sheet. So here's everything that the, you know, like the TIAC committee reviews. This is a listing of their comments. Here are comments from the meeting. And then when we get into the actual, you know, final design, detailed design, engineering design, we will then list, you know, whether or not we were able to do that, to what degree, or if we were not able to do it, why we were not able to do it. So a very transparent process. And then, you know, we didn't mention this, and I've been working on it for the last, I don't know, week. We produce basically an annual report or a progress report year to year, every September. And, you know, it kind of charts out, you know, all the things that, how many separated bike lanes that we, you know, I try not to fixate on the numbers so much, because some of it is qualitative in nature, you know. So like I'll give you an example, on Franklin Boulevard on the west side, you know, that's a 2-mile stretch of road that experienced a lot of high speeding. We're not putting bike lanes in there, but what we did do is we put 8 mini roundabouts instead of the signals, and now that's become like pretty much the premier bike boulevard through the west side of the city. And so that's not something, if you were just like, you know, data-driven or numbers-driven, say like, you know, that doesn't qualify as bike lane, but it does qualify for the, you know, the safety and qualitative experience of a rider coming from Lakewood all the way into Ohio City. So the report is reflective of that. We also use it as an opportunity to talk about upcoming projects, to inform the community about, over the next 3 years or so, this is what's in our capital budget. We're going to be looking at these projects. But also all those things in between. What are some cool quick build projects we did? How many street trees did we plant, you know, with some of our community partners? And then also, what are the things that guide our work? What are your active transportation plan? You know, spelling that out a little more. These are all things that go into that annual report. So try to make it digestible. It's not a very bureaucratic document. That's not the point. We want it to be something that anyone in this room or anyone would be able to read it and say, I have a very good understanding of, like, you know, what they're accomplishing year to year programmatically.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jacob.
I just want to know, in addition to the city having to publicly post any exceptions to a project must also be presented to the council member whose ward it is in as well. So there's that additional added level of transparency. And as Phil would probably know, our council members have, you know, dedicated capital CDBG dollars that they contribute to a project. If groups like us or Bike Lake would put some pressure and say, hey, we really need X incorporated into this project to improve safety. So.
That's a good point. On the West 65th Street project, we ran out of money on some of the protected elements. And we asked the council person if they would be able to use some of their discretionary capital funds to add some element to that. We're actually going to go back and do even more. They laid down the green thermoplastic stamping over top the bikes just to create clear delineation visually. And, you know, that's not nothing as far as an expense, but that's an example of how a council person was able to kind of come in on the back end on a project and help out with that. And there's a lot of those quick build type projects. That's where we're going next with council support, because their discretionary dollars, those dollars can go a long way. A speed table is $8,500. So you could put 3 speed tables down on a side street here in Lakewood for, you know, out the door costs of probably $20,000-$25,000 or, you know, thereabouts, and that makes a huge difference. And that's in Cleveland with council budgets there, that's within their realm. They have about $125,000 of discretionary capital funds that they can use. So if you sit down with a council person and really work out a good plan year to year, you can really start knocking out a lot of these quick build projects, and doesn't have to come out of the capital budget from the city coffers, from, you know, the general fund.
Yeah, I'm always amazed at how there are ways in which City of Cleveland operates similar to Lakewood and ways in which we operate differently. Sure. But the administration has done a great job with creating a process for speed bumps and traffic calming, and so that's something that council has really supported. And as a council person, particularly as a ward council person, speed, traffic, those are the things that we get called about. Rightfully so. These are communities, these are neighborhoods. We have a walking community here in Lakewood. We have 6-year-olds that walk to school, you know, so it's really important to us here. And At this time, a little bit off of the agenda, but I'd like to see the administration. I know you guys have already had opportunities to talk to Phil and Jacob, but if you have any questions for them, certainly would want to make this available for you. I wouldn't want you to not be able to ask them questions. Do you guys have any questions?
Thank you,
Yeah.
Mr. President. I'm just trying to get clarification on one thing. I'm a City of Cleveland resident. I live down at 58th and Herman. So as an example, when they're resurfacing Herman between 58th and 54th,
Yeah.
which they've done, does that rise to the first threshold or second threshold? I was just confused on just the answer.
A street like Herman would be considered just part of our residential resurfacing program. So that we wouldn't even really consider that necessarily a complete, like within this world of complete and Green Street projects. Now, that being said, a lot of times those projects, if there's resurfacing happening, we may work with the council person, depending on the project, and we've done this in some other side streets where if that improvement's going to be made, is that our opportunity to come in and maybe work to secure some funding for some street tree planting, some infill some of the tree lawns, maybe do some of those types of things, or if we know that thermoplastic paint's going to be laid down in certain areas, are we able to use some of those council's discretionary funds to maybe do an enhanced crosswalk there and something like that, or put an RRFB in, maybe something like that. So we try to leverage dollars all the time, of course, you know. So there are a select few cases like that, but I would say that those projects are part of just our regular. Every ward is going to resurface somewhere between 12 and 15 streets, and the council people have input on that, but it's also based on pavement condition ratings. So we take those two things. We take what are all the eligible streets based on pavement condition rating, and then we share that with the council person. The council person says, all right, of these 20 streets, I want to do these 12. And then if we have 12, maybe there's one or two in there, we say, look, there's a real good opportunity here to do some street greening or enhance the cross safety because we know there's an issue here, and then they might throw in some money and do it. So, but that doesn't go in front of the TAC.
I think the other thing I'll add, because I know in Lakewood's active transportation plan, it calls for a host of bicycle boulevards. I think with Cleveland Moves plan, our mobility plan that's being created, that's going to be one of the facility types that's going to be recommended. And I think the way it works now could possibly change if, you know, they're repaving a street that is called out to be a bicycle boulevard, which may then trigger, you know, additional signage or maybe some traffic calming depending on the capacity and the speed of the street that's being asked about.
This is reminding me just real quickly, we are also going to be looking at, when we do these residential resurfacings, can that be the opportunity if the street qualifies for a speed table? Because we have criteria for that. You have to have traffic counts between 1,000 and 4,000, and you have to have, the street already has to be 25 miles per hour, and the 85th percentile speeding has to be about 6 to 7 miles over. So there's certain streets that qualify, but if it is and it's going to be resurfaced, that's our opportunity to come in and lay down the speed table at an additional $8,500.
Can I ask one follow-up?
Yeah.
So Councilwoman Spencer, my councilwoman, has she seen a diminution or, you know, reduction in, and I know it's so new, we don't know yet. I'm just asking as both a resident and as a practitioner here at City Hall, with respect to the new program, like let's say in the plan, the future plan was to do 8 streets, and because of the new wave, it's going to be 3.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you guys have seen, or is it too new to know the number of streets that have been addressed, let's say, based on budget?
Yeah, so there's, not to get too in the weeds with the city's budget, we got about $34 million that we have to work with. And of that, for the residential resurfacing program, I want to say there's around 12 million that we've traditionally held. Now, we probably need, because of inflation, we got to increase that number, because we've been kind of getting by on ARPA funds to make up for the difference, you know, because of inflation costs. So at some point, we're going to have, you know, kind of a reconciliation here about what kind of dollars do we want to spend on this, because otherwise those numbers are going to go down. You know, our dollars that 3 years ago, they got us 15 streets, that's, of course, like you said. So that's a conversation that we're about to have. But we were also just, you know, to the point about the speed tables, it's like, let's get those things done too while we're there. Let's spend a little bit of the extra money and get those in.
Yeah, I think to your point, I do think with any project, you know, you're adding additional elements. Some may cost more, some may cost less. If they do end up costing more and you have to do one less street in a year, but you're getting a much more quality street that's safer, that helps people access, city services or amenities or wherever they need to get to, I think that's a solid trade-off if you have to push a project back a year to make a project, serve more residents of your community.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
It was a constituent hour there asking. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I know, it's directly on point. Appreciate the question. Because that's what we're, Director Byington.
Thank you. Through you, I just had a question. I wanted to make sure I heard everything correctly. So for the very large-scale projects, there's multiple meetings, and so I just want to walk through what I heard you say, and then ask how much design at each level kind of is presented. So for the very largest projects, it sounds like it first goes to the committee, and then I thought you said there's 2 public meetings either before or early design phase, and then if it has to go to planning commission, it goes to planning commission, and then there's another public meeting before construction? Is that about the right?
Yes.
Okay. So at those stages, could you give me just a real ballpark number on like what you're presenting, what you're showing the
Sure.
public during that?
So at the TAC meeting, it's conceptual design. So at that point, we're saying roughly we believe that we have this budget for this project. These are the project limits. These are the existing conditions, so on and so forth. We have a discussion about what the conceptual design should be. That may inform what type of money that we want to put towards, any additional money that we want to put towards that project. Let's say, for example, if we know in 2027, that year, when this project's going to go to get ready for having the funding allocated, we may have 3 projects like that year. And of the 3, we know that we have funding available to do the water line replacement, meaning that we're going to be able to do a more comprehensive design on that street. The TIAC committee may say, we've reviewed these 3 projects that are 3 years out or so, and we think that, this street in particular is a street that warrants additional dollars because we think that there's real issues with pedestrian safety, whatever it may be. So that helps maybe inform the decisions we're going to make in that fiscal year with what dollars we're going to allocate for that or whatever kind of funding we're going to try to leverage. So that's happened already with a few projects. We bumped other projects out so that, maybe in that next year we'd be eligible for those funds, but we want to reserve the funds for that particular project. So at TAC stage, we're at conceptual, and it's helping us inform some funding decisions, some idea of what we want. When we get into design for the first public meeting, that's when you're taking the comments from TAC and having a better sense of what our actual budget's going to be, and presenting a few designs that are probably, I guess you could say, like 30% or so. There's still some flexibility, but we've gotten enough feedback where we can present some more refined options. And then there's a second public meeting where it's like, okay, this is going to be basically the final design. The only tweaks to this are going to be maybe some smaller considerations of moving some line striping here or whatever it may be. There is a final public meeting, which is right before you begin construction. And that's really just to notify the folks in the localized area about how the logistics of the project will work. Typically, at that point, design's already locked in, so there's no alterations to the design at that point. And that usually happens roughly, I want to say, 45, 60 days out before the project starts. And all of that stuff is also communicated by way of the same channels that we're communicating about any other part of the public input process at that point, all the way to construction. Sure.
Director Vargo, you look like you want to ask a question.
Thank you. Through the chair, Madam President. Mr. Kidd, thanks for being here. Just a couple of questions again, just trying to understand what you said. The mobility plan of Cleveland, I think you said it was adopted some years ago?
Yes.
Is that right, 15 years ago?
2007 was the first.
Okay, 2007. Is there anything equivalent to an active transportation plan that you're working with now? Or are you just moving forward with TIAC, et cetera, as you described?
Why don't you start this? Yeah.
I wouldn't say there's a comprehensive active transportation plan now. We do have a host of kind of smaller corridor plans that are built off of to kind of help inform MOCAP projects. I would say in addition to that, we do have a Vision Zero action plan, which is helping inform projects in terms of addressing the high injury network and improvements along there. There may be others I'm forgetting, but I'll let Phil take over.
Yeah, there's some trail-related plans, so the Cuyahoga County is involved in some of this as well, because that helps identify what we consider critical gaps in the network, and so that may help influence the decision about how we want to treat a particular road, if it's a particular connection between linking a larger network. We did, in 2011, we passed the 1.0 version of Complete Green Street, which created a little bit more of framework around the 07 bike plan. It gave a little bit more design detail to that, what that should start to look like. But again, that was largely treated more as I would describe it more as, while it wasn't ordinance, it was more like a policy. And I think that we still were running into the same problems where we were getting 60% into a project and we just weren't, we weren't really having the ability to make some of the design changes. And of course, as you guys know, these are 20-year opportunities lost. We're not coming back to these streets for almost a generation. So we have to do the best job we can while we can. But we realize that we really need something now that pulls this all together. The Complete and Green Street, the Vision Zero, the old 07 plan, the Cuyahoga's plan, pull it together and have a really detailed 5-year plan with a 3-year rapid implementation for quick build projects. The new ordinance, the Complete and Green Street Ordinance of 2022, mandates that we update that plan every 5 years so that we're not in this situation again where, there was no mandate back in 07 and all that time goes past. So every 5 years, we have to revisit that plan. We're going to measure our progress against that plan. This program and the TIAC will make sure that that is getting done.
Thank you. Madam President, just a couple more. Mr. Chairman, just a couple more. Thank you for that. Every 5 years, you update the mobility plan?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And then the data-driven analysis that's done by the traffic engineers throughout this process, and you said sometimes you may seek outside engineering consultant work. Do you use Tool Design for any of that?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, Tool is the vendor who is doing the mobility plan for us as well. Yes.
Okay, and then before I leave, the 6 or 7 projects that have been considered, and I know one is about ready to roll out, could you just describe what they are? Are those what you would describe as full rehab projects?
Yeah, so probably the one that most people are probably familiar with is the Superior Midway project, which is it's a $24.6 million project, but most of it is between the curbs, and it's really for the construction of a raised 26 center median that is a bidirectional 10-foot bike path down the center. There's not going to be any right-of-way work done in the sidewalk areas there on that particular project. But that project is going to construction. We're finalizing design this year. We'll have detailed design probably in the spring, and we want to hopefully begin construction by the end of 2025, early 2026. So by that time, we will be able to go through the complete TIAC process of getting a project all the way to final design and be able to list out all of the design desires that were either met or those that were not, the exceptions and why they were. So that'll be one of our first test cases. There are some other projects that we would consider them mid-tier projects. For example, the Payne Avenue project, also Carnegie. These are projects that are phased. So, they're such large roads that we have to break them into sections. The Payne Avenue from 13th to East 30th is under construction right now, as is Carnegie Phase 1 from East 55th to 79th. Those will complete construction by roughly this time next year. And those predated the TIAC committee, so they didn't have a chance to review that, but they had kind of back-end input on it, particularly like with the protected bike lanes and things like that. So we are kind of considering them as adopted, Complete and Green Street projects. And we will probably also post all that project information to the Complete and Green Street website like we would for any other project, just because we think that warrants a level of, the public should be made aware and know, the details of that project and how that went down.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam President.
Thank you. Any other questions from Director Gordon?
That's loud. Thank you, Madam President and Mr. Chair. Just a quick question, following up on Director Vargo's question. Sorry, Chief Dunphy's calling me. So full rehabilitation projects are considered the Green Streets project. You said north of 5 million. Mid-level goes to TIAC, but not to Planning Commission. Roughly, what is the estimated amount for that?
To Planning Commission?
To just TIAC, but not Planning Commission?
Well, we could use Wade Park Avenue as an example. That's a $6.4 million project, budget as of right now. That's gone to the TIAC. That probably will not go to the Planning Commission, I would imagine. Unless there's some dramatic design thing that's added, which we don't anticipate that there will be. We think it's within, we can accomplish the things that the TIAC wants to do. Sorry, we sometimes just call it TAC because the TIAC's weird. By the way, it's the worst acronym in the world. Should just call
like
it the
TIAC,
Green Street
but yeah.
Committee. Yeah. But anyway, that is an example of one that will not go to the Planning Commission, that would be considered a mid-tier level project that the TIAC has reviewed. And it's a $6.4 million project, to give you some example. Ones that would definitely go to the Planning Commission, of course, there would be the Superior Midway project, $24.6 million. Lee Road is probably going to have a project budget of $15 to $25 million, definitely going to be in front of the Planning Commission. Trying to think of a good one that's maybe like, like right there on that line. But those are really the only two that are actually moving forward with design right now that are definitely, we know for sure will go to the Planning Commission. Those are two that I can definitely pull out for you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Kidd. And then the second question I just have for you is, I know you brought up before waterline replacement streets.
Yeah.
For those to go to TAC, I won't call it TIAC because it's
all right,
messing
that's
everybody up here. For those to go to TAC and the Planning Commission, roughly, is that pretty much waterline replacement on main roads, things of that nature?
Yeah, so we're looking mostly at like major collectors and arterials on those. And we're using issue 1 funds from the state on a lot of that. So those are our opportunities to do more substantive work on a project beyond the curbs. We do try to reserve some just general bond funds, some capital for this work where we might need to be, depaving is like the best example I can give, because there are some streets where we have the funding to do basically the urban paving funds and just to do a lot of stuff, I'll call it between the curbs. But we just simply, it's unacceptable to leave the sidewalks in certain conditions, even though we're not going to be doing utility work there, to have the chance to rehabilitate. So that's one of the big things that I think I kind of added when I came in from having my own particular say on project, was carving out capital budget to make sure that we go in there. Let's say if we got a 15-foot sidewalk, Payne Example is a good example of that. Of course, that right away was constructed at a time where there was a lot more commercial industrial activity and it warranted that level of sidewalk width, but that's not the case anymore. And we've got other goals we got to achieve. Our canopy covers at 17%. We're under consent decree for stormwater capture. There's other goals now in Cleveland. So one of the best things we can do is we are able to take maybe like 8 foot of that 15 foot and be able to depave those whole sections with our own money in-house, green that street up, come in with 50, 75, 100 street trees, and be able to plant that, and that's a dramatic difference to that section of the right-of-way project. Now, that's not within the budget or scope through maybe state funds or federal funds, but it's something we see as a value, and it's helping us achieve other adopted planning goals around urban canopy and stormwater mitigation and things like that. So those are examples of how, well, we're not doing water line, we still make those improvements when we can make them.
I think I'll add, because Phil brought this to my head, is, we're talking about these big reconstruction projects that go in front of the TIAC, and it's these group of people saying, we want to see these things in the project. But what Phil's talking about, in addition, are projects that aren't going in front of this committee, but the values and goals of the Complete and Green Streets Ordinance are still being embedded in those projects in areas that they can find ways to do it. I think that's, when I first started talking, Complete Streets isn't just an end product, it's a change in the approach and the process you take and how you're looking at your streets.
Yep, great. Way to say it. And quite honestly, now I got my project, my design engineers coming to me saying like, what do you think we can do here? You know, like that was unheard of like 5 years ago, you know, like as far I'm talking about like the depaving work, because they see the value in that too. The other thing that we've done too is we piloted things. We've used this as an opportunity to pilot things. So in just putting down grass seed for tree lawn, we're using low or no-mow grass treatments on these projects. And that's cutting down on any of the maintenance. You know, it helps us sell it to a property owner, right? Because a property owner, if you got a commercial building and you're putting in grass tree lawn and they've never had a grass tree lawn, they're like, well, yeah, I'm not maintaining a grass tree lawn. I got to come out here and cut the grass, you know, like once every 2 weeks. So by being able to do a low and sustainable grass treatment, not only are we piloting that and lowering the maintenance burden for the property owner, but also we're able to use that then on our own lots, in vacant parcels, in parks treatments, in other right-of-way areas on other projects. So there are some other things that we're using Complete and Green Streets as well that apply to more than just roadway projects.
Any other questions from the administration? No? Thank you. I do, I'm mindful, I consider this more of a work session. So there are some things on the agenda that I thought we'd get to, but I also want to be mindful of everyone's time. I would like to open it up for public comment, brief, maybe 2 minutes a person if folks want to talk. And you know, the administration's questions and our questions are getting into kind of the meat of where we're working with them on, right? Like what is a transportation project? How is Cleveland different than Lakewood? You know, Cleveland has 360,000 residents and 80-some square miles. Lakewood has 50,000 residents and 5 square miles. So what's the right Lakewood size? What's the right level to put this at to get the same outcomes, right? Because that's what I think there's a lot of shared kind of goals and objectives that the administration and council have, but it's figuring out the policy making of where that line is. And your you know, information and kind of experience has been really helpful. So I really appreciate your time and you coming to Lakewood in the evening when you could be doing, Guardians aren't on tonight, next week they'll be in the playoffs. But so at this time, I'd like to open it up for public comment. If there's anyone who has public comment, come up and say your name and address and what your comment is. Couldn't be a public comment without Mr. Organ, so hi.
Hey, good evening. Robert Organ, 14513 Bays. I think we all know, nobody will be surprised in this room to know that I am in support of an ordinance for Complete and Green Streets. Thank you, Jacob and Phil, for coming out, and thank the 3 city council members that have drafted this. I took some notes on my phone while I was, you know, listening to this testimony, this conversation. You know, I think that Complete Streets Ordinance obviously gives our active transportation plan some teeth over what a resolution would do. We know that our politics today can be pretty obstructionist. It doesn't take a lot of people to slow down the process of improving a street, particularly people from you know, out of town, maybe even out of state, that just own property here and rent it to, you know, lower income or younger people that are more likely to use these types of facilities. So I think it's really important to consider that. The other things that I would like to talk about is, you know, we're talking about the cost of these improvements. I think it was Phil that talked about some cheap and quick implementations, tactical urbanism, things that I've been advocating for a while that you've all heard me talk about, like curb extensions at Wascana and Madison in front of Angelo's, where, you know, that intersection is incredibly dangerous. Those things could be implemented very quickly and very easily without a ton of public comment, and that provides less room for there to be pushback. And I think the Complete Streets Ordinance would, you know, help to enforce that and provide a reason to do that other than, hey, we just felt like it, so that the businesses and the administration aren't butting heads as much. So, when we're talking about the cost of these improvements, we're talking about essentially the value of a human life. If somebody's hit by a car while riding their bike, while walking across the street, something like that, like, who wants to be the one to tell the family that, sorry, we considered this improvement, but we didn't do it because it would have cost a business a little bit of business, or it would have cost the city too much money. I understand that we have budget constraints that we all have to work within, but at the end of the day, we need to make improvements, and making this a resolution where, the Act of Transportation says consider curb extensions, consider elevated crosswalks, whatever it might be, that's really not going to get done as quickly, as efficiently, or as thoroughly as if this is an ordinance. And then we're also talking, and both of the people that came out tonight, mentioned it pretty late in their comments. You're getting positive externalities out of this. Like, we're getting additional tree cover, we're getting reduced noise, better air quality, we're meeting our sustainability goals more effectively, coming closer to it, hopefully. And then I do have some questions that, for people to think about, I guess. In the city of Cleveland, I talked about the renters versus owners. How does that work out when we know that we have owners that live out of town, out of state, and may not understand that people use these. They don't want their property value to be affected or something like that. So what kind of weight does their input carry? And then how does the city work with like RTA and ODOT? Because I know that in the city of Lakewood, we're running into those issues on streets like Clifton, which is, it's essentially a highway. It's signed for 35 and people are going 60 a lot of the time. So, I think that an ordinance would give all of this teeth and help us to implement it a little bit quicker, a little bit faster. These are long-term projects. I don't expect that every street in Lakewood is going to have a bike lane or an off-street bike path or protected bike lanes in my lifetime, but complete streets ordinance is going to make those things a lot faster. So, thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Organ. And to be clear, I usually don't. It's not a back and forth on public comment, but the administration is on board with an ordinance. So we're just working on kind of what's in there, right? What the thresholds are. So we're making progress and hope to have some information soon.
Sure. Thank you.
Hi, Emily Lindberg, 1651 Lauderdale. I just want to say how much this was so awesome to hear you guys talk and be here today. And I hate speaking publicly when I'm in front of anyone older than 5, so I wrote out what I was going to say. Because I really love stories, I wrote a little story today. Currently, 50% of my household is unable to drive, and the other 50% wishes that we didn't have to. This is not because we hate cars. It is because we value breathing clean air, maintaining our healthy bodies, and not being burdened by excessive transportation costs. My partner and I have been a one-car household for 19 years, 13 of which have been in Lakewood, and we love how bikeable and walkable it is here, in theory. True, we have a lot of sidewalks here, but I have often encountered obstacles on them that would be extremely difficult to navigate if I did have a disability. But even without a disability, it feels like a dangerous game of chicken every time I step into a crosswalk. But this is a game that, as a pedestrian, I'm not going to win. Every time I get on my bike to take my child to school, to pick up a prescription, or to present story time for the Lakewood Family Room, I run a series of calculations in my head. I visualize several different routes, and I evaluate them for comfort and safety. Sorry.
You finished that thought, yeah.
Okay. For example, when traveling from my home to Cove Community Center, I will ask myself, should I take Lake Avenue or Madison Avenue to travel east today? Both have bike lanes, which feel a little more comfortable than Detroit or Clifton. Lake probably has less traffic this time of day, but it also has a higher speed limit and less traffic lights than Madison, which means that the motorists will be traveling faster right next to me. Also, there are usually a lot of lawn care vehicles and Amazon trucks blocking the bike lane on Lake, forcing me to move into the vehicle travel lane. But then there's a lot of times that they're blocked on Madison too because of all the businesses there. I think of how many left turns I will have to navigate. Should I make my route a loop today or just go out and back? These are the types of mental gymnastics I must do every time I get on my bike just to arrive at my destination safely, I hope. This is why we need a complete streets ordinance, which I'm happy you're all on board with, that creates an equitable, balanced, and effective transportation system that will prioritize the most vulnerable road users, because users of all ages and abilities deserve the opportunity to travel independently throughout Lakewood safely, regardless of their mode of mobility. This is why I have come here to speak in support of the Complete Streets Ordinance today. And then I also really quickly just wanted to say thank you for all of the amazing responses that I've gotten for your participation in the Week Without Driving, which started today. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Zelinski, yeah.
Daniel Zielinski, 2197 Northland. So there were a couple of comments about data from Councilperson Streebing and Director Vargas. I would just call your attention to, I think it's Ohio State Highway Patrol, their guidance on the usage of data for planning recommends the usage of confirmed crashes. And in the city of Cleveland, one of the projects being done with Bike Cleveland and the data set collected by Angelo Trevisano is we're taking 911 calls and reconciling that against the confirmed crash reports. And what we're finding is that of all of the 911 calls for a pedestrian or cyclist that has been struck, and the police go out and look for somebody, only less than half of those calls result in the creation of a confirmed crash report. One of the things that I'm looking for, that I'm paying a lot of attention to with this ordinance, is Section 9. And the data requirements around it. I think that's a fantastic requirement. And yes, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comment? No? Well, thank you. I think Mr. Bullock had a last point. I would like to try to get us out of here by 7:30, only a half hour after.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the intent discussion of tonight is to learn a little bit about what a peer community is doing currently, having worked through a number of years, at least 10 of this process. Okay, and so slow start in phase 1, a better start in phase 2 with the new improved. What is it again? What's the committee called?
The TIAC.
TIAC, okay, TAC or TIAC. Now, but there's not a direct side-by-side comparison in the proposed ordinance as currently drafted, is there? In other words, they have two bodies, TIAC and the Planning Commission, that may get engaged in projects. The proposed ordinance that we have before us currently contemplates one body, which is the Planning Commission. I don't think that we distinguish project sizes in the current draft proposal, or in the current proposal, right? So there are different tiers that we heard from City of Cleveland in their but so there's insights to be gained but the point of tonight was not to do a line-by-line, side-by-side direct comparison. So the upshot, if I gather, is that this committee is going to have to work to incorporate the wisdom and experience, but make a process that is custom fit for Lakewood. Do I have that accurately?
Yes, and we've worked with the administration, so, you know, there are some overarching questions. So the council's version of the ordinance, it did admittedly derive from Councilmember McCormick's version, but there was lots of Lakewood right sizing of that ordinance, right? So Cleveland has nearly 400,000 residents. Their budget is 6 times Lakewood's, right? So it's a lot more than Lakewood. So they're just as different. They're dealing with different things. They have different problems, different opportunities, different challenges. So, you know, we have a charter in Lakewood. Our charter talks about planning commission. So those are, as we drafted, you know, myself and the co-sponsors and kind of looked at what is Lakewood specific, we did make a lot of different changes. And we are continuing to work with the administration to refine what those things are, mainly the definition of transportation project. The public meeting component as a planning commission is something else. And then some of the reporting, the exemptions. So that's the meat and the potatoes of what we're doing now. And it will not be Cleveland's because Cleveland's different and Cleveland has their own process.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And just since we're in committee and the committee's got to make the decision ultimately, what I'm interested in is responsiveness to the priorities that the community's consistently signaling to all of us, and then accountability in our process. So what drives me crazy is we hear, we commit, and then the project comes out and people shrug their shoulders and say, well, it couldn't be done, or it was decided. Hate the use of the passive voice. Who decided? The answer is we decide. The community decides and the city council needs to decide. And if we're going to pass a million plans, which I see called out by name in this ordinance, we've got to put our money where our mouths are, and we've got to put our decision-making where our mouths are. So what I'm interested in is not less accountability, not less ability for the citizens to exert their will in our projects, but more. Okay, so I appreciate that the
I do too.
authors of the legislation are working with the administration, but ultimately, I guess I'm signaling to the public and my colleagues that I have an opinion about this too, and I think I'm pretty clear about what it is that we have been waiting a long time to get active transportation elements in. The city has a strong budget. We can afford this. We need to allocate the funds to reflect the values and prioritize safety. And I'll even say things, I admire our traffic calming plan, but I wonder if the criteria are set a little too high because we're not getting enough $50 and $100 speed tables out on enough streets, in my view. And I'm tiring of the explanations to the public who say, well, we have our process in the data. And you know, I think there's consensus around these policies, and I'm eager to work collegially with the administration, with my colleagues, to get this done this year and a strong process that we can begin implementing next year. Thanks.
No, absolutely, and your points are very appropriate, Councilman Bullock, and I know one of the things that we've been working on is shared values, right? Shared values, shared objectives, but how do you create a process? This is unique, but Lakewood is a progressive community. We need to be out there in front doing things that maybe we're taking things from other communities that have been successful, but understanding that they're different than Lakewood. But I totally agree with you, and you know, so that's why we're working on this. That's why, you know, Council President Keppel and I have taken, you know, 5 afternoons of PTO time to meet and to discuss with the administration. We'll continue to do so, and thank you for your signaling your support, because then that gives us, you know, some indication of how the committee would feel about it. She's a business owner, so it's a PTO from herself, yeah. But I have to physically take PTO.
There's no pay if I'm not working.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and unless there's anything else that's pressing, I appreciate everyone's time and effort, particularly our guests for coming to Lakewood, for the public for coming, and stay tuned. We're going to continue to work with the administration, and appreciate all of your input.
Just would like to add, I would be happy to come back, you know, year to year and check in with you guys, and also host you in Cleveland if there's, especially as we get into the quick build projects over the next 3 years. I think there may be some value in having, you know, the administration and council come out and let's take a look at some of these sites and see what might be applicable to Lakewood.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know in my day job, Phil, I work with you on the RAISE projects and some of the exciting things we got coming through. So, well, thank you. Without objection, this committee is adjourned. Appreciate everyone's time. Oh.
Appreciate you guys' time.
Oh, absolutely.
Sorry, guys. You guys pot shot my work after.
Got anything?
I'm messing.
What do you mean?